So today we have joining us, we have Marco, Robin, and Mike. I'm just looking across the screen, and Michael, looking for everybody. Yeah, Marco, Robin, and Michael have joined us today. So yeah, Marco, do you want to begin by introducing everyone yourself?
Yeah, of course. I just introduce myself and then I pass over to everybody else. So really delighted, Dan and James. Thanks for hosting us today. I'm Marco Davey. I'm based out of Manchester officially, and I live in Maidenhead near London. And head of partnerships. So I'm here to support you guys. And I'm going to hand over to Robin so she can say quickly who she is.
Perfect. Thank you, Marco. Yeah, so I'm Robin. I've been with CloudM for 5 years, so mainly focused around the commercial side of sales as an account manager, but also really listening to kind of what it is that our customers and partners really need and making sure that we can make that happen, essentially. Pass over to you, Mike.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Mike. I'm solutions architect at CloudM. So I've been with the business for over 10 years now. I've lost count on the number of migrations I've been involved in over that time. So I'll be this morning or this afternoon for some of you sharing some information on our migration products if you've not used it before or heard of it, and just a bit of information about ourselves, showing you how it works with a quick demo, and then answering any questions that you may have that comes out of that. So yeah, a little bit about us if you've not used us before or worked with us before. So we're, as Marco alluded to, we're based in Manchester in the UK, but we have people located all over the world, across Europe, Asia, and APAC. Essentially, we're a software company that works almost exclusively with Google and Google Workspace to kind of enhance their capabilities with things like backup and archiving solutions, automation, onboarding, offboarding. But then also what we're here to talk about today is migration, which is kind of our bread and butter. That's what we started doing. What we've always done is data migrations into Google Workspace over the past 15 years or so. That's what we've been doing. In that time, we've completed over 80 million migrations all over the world across 107 countries, 45,000 individual customers that we've worked with. I think, I don't think there's anyone in the world that has performed more migrations to Google Workspace. In terms of the actual products that we offer, I'll provide a little bit of information on that. But yeah, like I said, we're a market leader. Long track record of completing complex, large scale, all kind of migrations really, from one user up to hundreds of thousands. As well as providing the software, which is what we primarily do, we do also have a services arm where you can contract us, our services team, to either advise on or perform the migration on your behalf as well. We will touch on a little bit on the platform supported reportability, which I think are two of the main key features, as well as support that we have available should you need it as well. So the main thing probably you're thinking is, you migrate, but where do you migrate from? And basically it's everywhere that you can think of. So we've broken it down into a few types. So we can migrate archives, which includes Google Vault. So if you're doing Google to Google migrations, you can migrate the Google Vault, or if you're going from Microsoft or other archive systems, you can migrate into Google Vault, both mail and files. That includes Mbox files, PST files. So if you're talking about just local archives, as well as Microsoft 365 online archiving. Then mailbox stuff, so Google to Google and Microsoft to Google, Microsoft 365 to Google. These days, those are our kind of main migration paths, cloud to cloud these days. But from when we started, and we still do now, support a lot of on-prem systems. So if there are any of you out there that may come across, Exchange on-prem, GroupWise, Lotus Notes, Scalix, Oracle, things like that, Zimbra, those are all supported natively. So that's one of those are supported source platforms. For anything else, there's also IMAP connections available. So if you had any more niche kind of mail systems that support IMAP, you can also migrate the mail that way. Then we have files, so Google Drive to Google Drive, OneDrive, SharePoint Online, SharePoint On-Prem, Dropbox, Box, all those cloud file providers. You can migrate into Google Drive, shared drives, and personal drives, as well as Google Cloud Storage, kind of blob storage. You can also migrate from Azure Blob Storage, and local Windows files as well. So if you have any old school, like just file servers sat there with shared files or personal files folders, they can also be migrated into shared drives or personal Google Drives. And then finally, for cloud-to-cloud migrations, we have the collaboration suite. So Google Spaces, Microsoft Teams, public folders, Google Groups, Microsoft Groups can all be migrated. So we can migrate Microsoft Teams into Google Spaces, rehydrating all of the channels and the chat, as well as all the files that were associated with those teams, into Google Spaces and Google Shared Drives, which is quite a powerful new feature or new path for migration as well. There are 2 deployment options as well. So we have both a SaaS version and an on-premise version, hosted, self-hosted, which means you can choose to simply have us host the migration. You access it in a browser. All the infrastructure is spun up by us. Nothing you need to do other than sign in, set up the migration, and run it. If you have a more complex migration, or you have security concerns, you need the data to remain hosted by you, you can run it yourself. So it's a Windows application, you can install it on your own infrastructure, on your own VMs in Google Cloud, Amazon, Azure, wherever you happen to run these things. They both work in the same way in terms of what you can migrate mostly, the config options available, how the UI, how it works, the flow, but it's just where it's hosted and the control you have over it. Self-hosted is, like I said, it's Windows application, primary and secondary servers, so you can add more, which means you can run more migrations concurrently. Each server that you add will run 20 by default, so if you've got thousands and thousands of users or items to migrate or objects, you're probably more suited to use that version. You can get higher concurrency and complete the migration more quickly, essentially. If you're using the SaaS version, it does scale, but up to a point, because it's our infrastructure. We need to limit that, so you can run up to 155 concurrent migrations. You can run up to 2,500 migrations in total, but it just means only 155 will run concurrently at the same time. So if you need to get higher throughput, or if you need more control, control over the data security-wise, then self-hosted. For all of the other cases, most people go for the hosted solution. It's just easier. There's no setup or installation required. And the login's all done using SSO. So you sign in with a Google account. Everything's associated with that. If you have multiple migrations to run for different organizations, you can access them all in one UI. So quite usable. And then I think the main consideration that people have, as well as how long is it going to take, how do I set it up, the obvious ones is the reportability. No migration, or very rarely a migration will be absolutely 100% successful. You are going to have a small amount, less than 1%, less than 0.1% on average over the migrations that we do, of items that fail for whatever reason. Google rejects them, size limits, file type limits, etc. most commonly. But you want to know, you want that reportability. You want to know what's failed, why, what succeeded, the amount of data you've migrated, the throughput, all that, which is what we offer as well. So you can get very detailed, individual, user by user, drive by drive, whatever you migrate in, reports, estimations, status updates as the migration's in progress. We'll show a little bit more of that through the demo. In terms of security, so both versions, or both deployment options, migration is fully encrypted at all times, in transit and in storage. The data does flow through wherever it's installed, whether that's by us or by you. But all the databases, all the transfers are all completely encrypted. We're certified ISO Cyber Essentials if that's required. Hosted in Google, our hosted version in Google Cloud Platform, which means both for security and for performance, you're getting the best you can, basically. If that all sounds a little bit too complicated, a little bit too time consuming, we do also have services, as I mentioned, so you can assign us to do the migration. You get a dedicated team, a project manager, deployment specialist, 24/7 support, all backed up by our product development team. So, if there are any bugs, issues on that rare occasion, you've got direct lines into that. That does come at a cost, of course, to contract the whole migration. We also have a middle ground, which is Smart Starts, which means you can have an assigned engineer to not perform the migration for you, but assist you. You can purchase blocks of hours of an engineer's time who will guide you through the setup, the config, any questions you have. You've got a kind of direct line to that person who's very experienced in these migrations. And then, otherwise, grab the licenses, access the tool, and run the migrations, which I'll go through now. So this is the product. This is the self-hosted version, but there is no difference in terms of the UI and how you set it up, regardless of which version you choose to use. The first thing you would do once you've accessed the product is to create a project. So the project is linked to the destination that you're migrating to, so the Google Workspace instance, and it's licensed to that instance. So you can migrate from any platform, any different platforms at the same time to that same destination within one project. And you can have multiple projects, and you can flick through them if you have multiple destinations to migrate to. Once the migration's in progress, this home screen is where you'll be able to monitor the status, success rates, number of users that migrated, speed, get an estimation based on the throughput and the total size of the data, and then individual kind of breakdowns from users on data progress, how much was migrated, the time it's taken, very detailed information that's all very useful as you run through the migration and also afterwards. At the end of migration, you get reports that you can export that you can find in these archives as well. But then under the configurations, that's where the actual the work is done. That's where you configure the migration, run it, and monitor the individual progress of items there as well. So you can see here in our demo environment, we've got all sorts of different migration paths. We'll focus on, I think, Microsoft to Google, Google to Google, which are the two main ones. But really, regardless of the source platform, the process is the same. You click into configure or create a new config if you're just starting for the first time. And then you just flow through these steps you can see here. So there's 5 fairly simple steps to complete, then a summary, and then the execution of the migration. So the first step naturally is the source platform. So this is where you select which source platform of all those ones that we mentioned you're migrating from. So in this case, Microsoft to Google. You then connect to that source platform. Obviously, these steps will be slightly different depending on which platform you're using, but whether it's Google or Microsoft as your source, it's the same kind of approach. You create an app registration in Microsoft, a service account in Google, apply the details, add your admin details, and then you're good to go, essentially. You can create the app directly in here, so it's even easier. You just click through here. That'll take you away to your Microsoft instance, sign in with your admin, consent to the app creation. It populates all these details. So it really should just be a few seconds, a few clicks. As long as you've got the required access, you're away, and then you connect it to your source environment. If you click through to next, that will then run a test. So that just validates, before you actually migrate any data, run any migrations, it just verifies that all those steps were completed correctly. You can connect to each of those endpoints, and then you can move on to the destination. So that can be Google Workspace. You can migrate into Google Vault also, Google Cloud Storage. It's a very similar approach, except on this side, on the Google side, you create a service account. If you've done any migrations or have other third-party integrations before, you'll probably be familiar with this, but you just create a service account, enable the various APIs, and then authorize that using domain-wide delegation to your Workspace instance. That service account has a JSON or a P12 file associated with it, which you upload as well as your admin, and then again, you're good to go, and then it'll run that test. Make sure you can connect to each of those endpoints for all of the APIs. So these are all the item types we support. Each of the APIs that are used to import or export that data will be tested and verified. So happy days, you're all good. You move on. It's probably the main bit, which is where you actually select what you want to migrate, which users, which groups, which teams, which SharePoint sites, whatever it is, depending on the source platform. So these are all the item types you can migrate from Microsoft 365. So users, calendar resources, public folders, groups, SharePoint team sites, and Microsoft Teams. A couple of ways you can populate this list. Easiest one is you go to get items from source. Select yes, that will do an auto discover, and it will pull through everything it finds from the source environment you've configured earlier. So here we've got a bunch of users, groups, teams that it's pulled from the source. You can select and deselect what you want to migrate in terms of, you want to run this user or not. And then within that, each item type you can choose. So mail, contacts, calendars, tasks, drive, conversations, so chat conversations in Teams or private chats, or if it was Google, Google Spaces you can migrate. So you may just want to migrate the mail, you may just want to migrate the drive, you may want to migrate everything. You may want to do it in phases, so you want to migrate just the mail first, just the mail and drive, and then run everything after. So you can configure it however you want. There's no limitation on the number of passes you can run. So you'd usually run a pre-stage and then a delta migration. Nothing special you need to do. You run the migration, run it again. It runs a delta migration, just migrates any changes or new items. You can filter through this list. So if you wanted to find just the users, just the shared drives, just anything that you've selected. So here for this, we'll run a shared drive and a user migration, for example. If you didn't want to auto discover, you can also just supply your own list. So you can upload a CSV list of just the items you want to migrate, or even if it's very small, just add them manually using these add each item types. So then after you've connected both sides, you've added the items you want to migrate, you come to the config settings. So this is where you can manipulate the migration, essentially. So if you want to restrict it to just certain dates, so you wanted to migrate maybe just the last year, the last 2 years of email rather than everything, you can do that from here. Same for each different item type. There's a lot of advanced settings, and there's a lot of information on them, tooltips. We have a knowledge base that describes all of them as well. So I won't go into every single one, but you can do things like exclude certain folders for emails, exclude certain attachments, only include certain folders, labels messages as you migrate them. Same for files, so you can apply a top-level folder. You can exclude item types, include item types, both, as well as file names, what kind of wildcard matches you can do. You can choose to filter by either when you last modified or or when the file was created. You've got replacements, so if your addresses are changing, you can provide a mapping, for example. Here, just make sure that all permissions, calendar events, attendees, etc. reflect any address changes, email address changes that are happening. There's a lot of stuff you can do. I would say in my experience, generally, the default settings just migrate everything and then migrate it in the same state that it was in the source where possible. So that's what most people do. But, if you do have specific requirements, there's a lot of options for you as well. And then finally, you've got the option to run a scan as well. So perhaps if you're not that familiar with the source environment, how much data you've got, how that data is structured, the tool can give you a report on that before you run the migration. So you can see the number of files, folders, permissions, emails, email folders, any failures that happened when scanning, which will give you an idea of how much data you've got, how it's structured, which will most importantly probably tell you or indicate to you how long the migration will take. But also any potential issues that may arise. If you have a lot of externally owned files that you may need to, add some communication around that, things like that can be highlighted in that report. If you're in a rush, or if you've already got that data from the source, you don't have to run that scan, but it can be quite useful as a kind of pre-migration tool if you have the time to do it. And then you can run the migration, so you can schedule it to start a specific day or time. Particularly for Delta migrations, usually you'd run them over a weekend, maybe on a Friday evening. So you may just want to schedule that, or you can just hit start and it will run. So once you run the migration, we've got just 2 objects here, but it could be hundreds, it could be thousands. It will run as many concurrently as you have threads available, depending on whether that's hosted or self-hosted. And each one that's running or queued, you would see here. So you would see the status, the number of items that have successfully migrated. If any failures do occur, they'll be there. The numbers will start to tick up as it progresses. You can click on the number and it will basically list all the items that have migrated or not, as the case may be. And then you've got more general statistics here. So number of items per item type, throughput rates, success percentage, all that good stuff that you want to see. You can generate reports to export as well in progress. Generate report here, or at the end of the migration, automatically that's generated, and then you can view that back in the archive that we mentioned at the in the main projects page at the beginning. In terms of time, the main question we always get is how long will the migration take, and the answer is how long is a piece of string. It completely depends on how much data you have, the number of users. The throughput is very much dependent on the number of concurrent migrations you're able to do. So the more users, sites, drives, whatever you've got that you run at the same time, the quicker it will be, because then you're maximizing the pipe that you've got available. You are restricted by Google and other platforms on the amount of concurrent requests you can make, API calls, quotas, throttling. That's natural. But a lot of those are individual user or drive based, which means the more you run at the same time, the quicker it's going to be at its most basic. But a lot of things that I've mentioned there, and things like performance tips, setup guides, step by step, how to perform the migrations, how to set up those service accounts, etc., can be found here. Support.cloudm.io, that's our knowledge base. You can click through. Kind of general user guide, information on both versions of the products, self-hosted infrastructure requirements, project guides, troubleshooting, FAQs, very valuable resources in here. You can also submit requests to our support team as well. That's all included in the license. So if any errors you're not sure about, anything you need clarification on, first step should be to search through here. There's most likely we'll find it in here, but if not, you can also have our support team available.
Michael, sorry, I think when you were showing.
Yeah, I just realized that.
Brilliant.
Yeah, that's all in here. Support.cloudm.io.